Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I think I actually have my Ethernet cable plugged in, but I'm pretty sure I'm still on Wi Fi. So if the connection is slightly less stable than it usually is, that's because I'm a goddamn moron. I see we have a very lively live chat already. I saw you guys yapping at each other about who's the best at yapping and who's the best at super chatting, which is fun. Welcome, one and all, to the stream. Today is a bit early, admittedly, and I've had already some complaints about that. But I did have a very a late work day yesterday, so I wasn't streaming, and that's why I have a very short day today, and that's why I'm streaming a little bit earlier because otherwise. I'll just not wait until 6 p.m. Like, I'll probably fall asleep right after the stream. Yeah, and tomorrow is once again a long day, and then I actually want to hit the gym for once. So yeah, you basically get me today and then again on Friday, depending on how the rumor cycle plays out. We actually have quite a few smaller topics to cover before I start. I already see Maximus leaving a generous $5.99, saying, as promised, here's a super chat. Oh yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, well, I don't remember who promises what. I'm just glad to have you guys here, but still, thank you. So thanks for the great chip talk recently. My favorite thing that you cover. Yeah, I hear that a lot. Believe me, when I talk about software, it usually is more like, oh, is it actually dramatic or not? My still at work, but have an AirPod in. Well, don't let them catch you if that's bad. We have also a super chat from Steve at 249 saying, "Okay, Max, guess I now have to do my part as well." Okay, so you guys are competing with each other, and then I see a lot of yapping. Which my children, I love you all. No matter how much you yap or super chat, just having you here is already very, very well, much appreciated. So, but without further ado, let's actually get started with the plethora of topics we have today. And I think first and foremost, we do have to acknowledge all the drama that has been happening with the first iOS 26 beta. This is honestly where it gets a little bit silly, in my opinion, because while I do understand the actual complaint, I do really struggle with people not fully understanding what a beta is. And don't get me wrong, it's absolutely okay for you to go online and to say, oh, this is wrong in the beta. However, it's even better for you to tell that directly to Apple, right? Because that's what the feedback mechanism is inside a betas. That's what betas are for. But please don't go online and tell me how much Steve Jobs would be turning in his fucking grave for some bullshit like that. I mean, we reacted to front page text to John Prosser's video. Drew from Tailosive Tech has also been on and off. He also hasn't like posted in 1.5 weeks. I looked up if he had posted anything yesterday. Seems like he might be taking a vacation. I mean, good for him. Chill, enjoy some time with the family, and then return back, hopefully a little bit happier than I've seen him in the last couple of Apple-related videos. But yeah, the main issue with the iOS 26 design and its liquid glass UI is obviously readability, right? What do you do if UI elements are supposed to be transparent or highly, highly translucent, as what's the case with iOS 26? What do you do if they're so transparent that basically what's underneath them, be it the wallpaper, another app, text, or anything else like it, what do you do, right, if that shines through so much, especially if it's like a bright white wallpaper or a bright background, like in Safari, I guess, if you're not using dark mode? Well, obviously then the glass will just let all that light through, and that will interfere with the text on the icons that are, for example, in Control Center, or it will interfere with the text that is in Messages that you see in the Notification Center, right? Or it will interfere with the control elements in Safari, right? Which, if you even look here, right, you see that the upper bar here is transparent or translucent, I guess. And if before that, that could actually be really bad for like the back and forth buttons. Also, please ignore the dark lines under the tabs. um, because that is a bug, and that is officially confirmed as a bug by Apple. So this is not either a choice by me, nor is it intentional as part of the design. I am on the latest macOS 26 beta, as I am on the latest iOS 26, iPadOS, tvOS, and watchOS 26 betas. So I will be going through all the issues with you. And obviously, I've also had the control center issue. In fact, if you want to, you can follow my Discord. The link for that is in the description of this channel, and you will find me also covering that issue and how after that has been improved, right? So again, it is what it is. It is a beta. I do understand the complaints, but don't forget that yeah, it's just it's I don't want to be like an Apple defender here, I guess, because like what am I supposed to do in such a scenario? Sorry, I had to respond to a quick message. But yeah, this was definitely an issue, and there is still some legibility, some readability issues, some UI elements that overlap and stuff like that. With it, I would say that Apple has solved it in about as clean of a way as they could, without like going back on the core design language that they tried to go with here. I've seen some people claim that it now means that liquid glass is now dead. But if you actually look at those elements, not only are they still transparent and translucent, but they still reflect and refract. So they still are liquid glass. They're just, I guess, a little bit less liquidy. But yeah, you can take it however you want. I think that there are some really good signs that Apple is listening here. I think that there are also some signs that Apple might be listening, honestly, a little bit too much, in my opinion. One example actually follows right after, because there was another design gate inside of iOS 26 beta 1, which has now been fixed with beta 2, which is that Apple switched around which part of the Finder icon is blue and which one is white. If you follow my streams, you know that I've compared it to the racism of the black and white aliens in Star Trek, the original series, because basically one side was hating the other for being black on the right side but white on the left, while they themselves were right on the left and white on the right. And honestly, I didn't get that backlash at all. It felt like it just felt like people were complaining because it's different, which with Control Center, I really can see why you would complain. It literally made it more difficult to use the Control Center. But here, like, what is really your excuse to hate on this as much, right? So it was like this in the iOS 26 beta. This is how it is now. We actually have now designers. Jesus, am I? Wait, did I? Oh, I opened up. I thought I opened up a new tab. I should probably configure it to always open up a new tab instead of covering anything that I have already opened, because that just confuses me. Sorry, I also have to like deal with some family stuff on the side on my iPad, so I might occasionally look on it a little bit more than I usually do. Yeah, and we now have designers basically chiming in and basically saying, oh, this is how you should have done. So here the core suggestion is, I guess, that the glass is right where the two sides meet, right? But otherwise, the icon would be pretty much the same as it was before. Again, I have absolutely no skin in the game. Maybe you want Apple to go this far back, I guess, in my opinion. The issue, Finder has a dark side and a light side. The dark side is located on the left half of the face, while the light side makes up the right half. Finder in macOS Tahoe 26 reversed this arrangement. Okay. The Finder logo has changed over the years, but the dark side has been on the left forever. This is coming from Steve Hackett, whoever. I know I'm going to sound old and fussy, but Apple needs to roll this back. Yeah, this is completely arbitrary. This is not actual criticism based on the actual, like, anything real. But I think people just like to complain. Um, yeah. 14-day national nightmare is over. But I guess this now implies that all of Finder is darkness, right? But there is some light in it. It is honestly a little bit baffling to me. System, yeah, Riley, this is so correct. Riley, by the way, our number one yapper today. I see Steve and him chasing each other, but yeah, this is this is unemployment, the debate personified, and they're not even saying that the person themselves is unemployed, right? You can be employed and you can be successful while wildly sounding like a jobless person. Absolutely. Like, you will just focus on the most, like, because believe me, I do complain a lot here on this channel. You have seen my rants. You have seen me fucking spit at the screen and sweat and get red in the face. But usually I at least try to connect it to something moderately important, right? Like, I want the device to give me a good price to performance ratio. I want my device to perform well. I want my device to not get unnecessarily hot. I want my internet connectivity to be great. I want my cameras to be state of the art if I paid $1,200 or more, right? That's where I'm coming from when I complain. This, like, how this icon looks is completely irrelevant. Like, don't get me wrong, if it looked trash, that would be one thing, but it was literally this, just the other way around. I guess if you like colors more than you like white and black, like contrast, then yeah, I can somewhat see it. But yeah, this is completely stupid. And yeah, people are posting what they think a liquid glass based Finder is supposed to look like. This guy is not bad. I've seen him post some stuff on Twitter and whatever. Unfortunately, this is very much a person who has, in my opinion, a good grasp on what works about Apple. Like, he, for example, complains about one thing that I have complained about, for example, that icons that don't neatly fit into basically Apple's squircle arrangement for icons, right? They now have this gray bars on top of them. You also have clear regression for certain apps like fonts, for example. And he posts about that, and usually I do agree with him at least like 60-70% of the time, but I do find like some of this is honestly a little bit yeah. So Riley, I actually agree with you. Also, just in general, I do like the overall aesthetic of liquid glass. I do think it has problems, and I do think it especially has problems that are based on it being a beta for now, right? But I do think that all of this is solvable. People underestimate how many smaller and even larger scale issues iOS 7 had back in the day. I would also argue that iOS 26 performs way better on a vast array of hardware for 2025 than iOS 7 did for the time that it came out. It had noticeable downgrades in performance for the iPhone 4S. It really was bad on the iPhone 4. And yeah, it took us up until iOS 8 to get rid of some of the neon colors and some of the actual like readability, intruding transparency elements. And then we, of course, kept refining it. And I think that anywhere between iOS 10 and where we are now, we have figured out the overall design aesthetic. And that then afterwards allowed Apple, for example, to design widgets and lock screen complications, right? based on that original iOS 7, but now refined design language. And I think the same thing will be true for Liquid Glass, which, while yes, I agree, it is still best on Vision Pro. I still think it's not as perfect of a fit for 2D screens as iPhones, iPads, and Macs and everything like that. But I do think that they will get it to work. In some ways, they will have to scale it back if you want to consider that. For example, what we're seeing with Control Center. In some cases, they might have to listen a little bit to like the nitpickers who have been with Apple's hardware and software for decades. But I do believe that overall, they will find a way to satisfy most people. Yeah, so basically that's kind of the drama, but I don't want to pretend like there was actual drama here. The people who blew up the iOS 26 story, I honestly think that that was vastly overstated, and I think people really tried to ignore that we were talking about the first beta for a major new OS 3 months before its actual release. And with a huge redesign that spans across all of Apple's platforms. That is not an easy thing to do. But speaking of all the betas, and this is something that there's obviously no article about, but I've seen like when you remember me reacting to John Prosser, he said that the beta feels like barely improved over the 3-month-old version that they had before they leaked it. But honestly, with how much Apple has improved just from beta 1 to beta 2, and I do not actually mean the design aesthetic, I really mean like the system is more stable, runs less hot, battery is actually kind of already back to a regular release, which is crazy on my iPhone. On my iPad, it's completely unimpacted. I think there's just like more overhead on an iPad when it comes to thermals. And even if the OS overall consumes a bit more energy, that's just less relevant if you have a way larger battery. Yeah, but I am very happy with iOS 26 Beta 2. Again, there's obviously still room for improvements. There are some bugs that Apple even mentions in their release notes, which, by the way, I find funny how people are like so obsessed that they want like the most detailed release notes. I guess like channels like Zolotech, it would benefit their work a lot. But honestly, if everything was colored in the release notes, I would almost argue that their job would be way less important. So in some ways, shouldn't you be happy that the release notes are less detailed? Yeah, it's again, I don't want to shit on anyone in the community. I do understand some of the complaints. I just don't understand the intensity of some of the complaints, and I do not understand why some people basically all the time there's a beta version with some issues pretend like Apple is going downhill. Betas are exactly for this. They are for your feedback, and they're for engineers to get stuff wrong so they learn how to get it right. Yeah, it's really it's basically a personal complaint here from me. I'm not gonna pretend like the community is completely wrong. Sometimes I do, right? Believe me, sometimes I will fight them tooth and nail on issues. And in fact, just at this stream, we'll actually get one where I completely agree with the community, right? So it's not like I'm an Apple defender, and whenever there's an issue, you can bet on me disagreeing with the majority of people. No, I can actually. It's always so hard to control the keyboard on my iPad because I'm responding to some stuff, and I would love to type it faster on my Mac, but I would need to move the cursor all the time. So, yeah. So basically, again, it is getting better, but I do think that the community overstated some of the issues. That's basically my entire point. But I'm not sure if I actually have the article open, which is Apple Wallet F1, because I have discussed this with you guys on Discord. Yeah, you also know that this is an issue that goes beyond the Apple community in the way it's being covered if it's mentioned by channels that aren't like our usuals. So there was actually a problem that happened yesterday that I obviously haven't yet been able to talk much about. That I do believe that Apple got something wrong. Now, you know me, if you follow me even from back in the day on Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever, that I don't actually mind some ads if they are done specifically to the benefit of the consumer, right? Obviously, there's a benefit to the company as well, but I think there's a difference between a promotion and actually giving you something that you are entitled to. So, one thing that I actually highly disagree with is when people say that oh, the settings app, they mention stuff like, oh, you get Apple TV Plus for 3 months, and you get like Apple Music, and you get like all that stuff, right? And to me, I don't consider those things ads. I consider them the same thing as if you previously had a product, right? And it came with like an install disk with a software that was like bundled with your device, but thankfully not pre installed if you actually didn't want to. I also think that settings informing you that your iCloud space is running out and you might want to buy more so your actual iCloud functionality is maintained. While is it adverty in a way? Yes. Is it actually to the detriment of the consumer? No. However, this I consider purely promotional. It's not evil because I get similar notifications from every like bank account app and everything that I have, at least if I don't disable all notifications. But Apple does have the benefit of obviously having Wallet pre-installed. They also have the benefit of Apple Pay having a huge amount of mind share. So yes, I do believe that Apple needs to be more careful, and this is why them promoting their Formula One movie with Brad Pitt through the Apple Pay, or I guess through the wallet itself. I'm not sure if this is like a partnership with some credit card companies in the United States, because I definitely did not get the message, and the movie's soon coming out here in Germany as well. So I'm not sure. Maybe it's actually more related to like your credit card company, but obviously this is something that's happening because it's connected with Apple Pay. It's because Apple has a relationship with that credit card company, and it's because Apple is choosing to advertise this movie. This movie obviously is an Apple TV Plus movie. It supposedly has a huge $300 million budget. It's probably has like a $200 million advertising budget. So to break even, it probably needs to make like $800 million or more. Not that Apple needs the movie to really break even, but yeah, they are basically saying something like save on 2 or more tickets to the Formula One, the movie, with Apple Pay 10. So this is basically like your code. Ends on 29th of June. While supplies last, terms apply. And yeah, people have come out on the web and complained about it. And to be quite honest, I actually do agree with this. I think that promotional stuff as part of Apple Pay is not bad by itself, but I do believe that it should be an optional button for you to enable. It should not be the default experience that you get bombarded with stuff like this. Not again, it's not terrible because I don't consider it actually highly detrimental to the end user. I think that like what we see, for example, with Samsung advertising you buy hardware, even though they're advertising you blindly hardware that might actually be the same or worse than what you already have. So it's not even personalized in the slightest. That to me is bad. But this I consider not good, and definitely something they shouldn't be doing. Steve, you were saying Zolo, which I like, isn't Zolo written with double L? Yeah, I do believe that Zolotech is a cool channel. I'm not against that. I do watch them as well when it comes to like informing myself specifically about certain betas. Sometimes when there are big issues, obviously they're some of the first to cover it, or he. But I'm just saying that not everything should be that that like laser focused on every small detail in like a negative way. It's fine in my opinion if you want to analyze it all, but that shouldn't really be something that, like, for example, for Mac OS, for sites like Mac Rumors and 9 to 5 Mac, I think this things that go onto the main page should be actual issues, right? All those kind of like super small complaints and like kind of random people complaining about them on Twitter, while I do understand it's a discussion that's being had in the community overall, I do think it detracts from actual stories. Like the control center story was actually real because it actually had a real negative impact on the user. It's similar to what I'm talking about with the ads, right? But you might dislike something without it actually being bad or without it being even worth covering so too much. Again, all of this is happening from a very thankfully privileged position where we in the community are obviously complaining on a really high level. I know there are some people, if you want to even pretend like they're still in the community, who will say that Apple has already gone downhill and blah, 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 right? But at this point, I'm like, okay, so if you're not going to be actually mentioning details, or if you're going to be pretending that apps that are used by millions of people every day, devices that are used by tens and hundreds of millions of users every day, basically don't work at all, then you're a moron who doesn't deserve a word in that conversation, right? Because if you're just complaining and you don't actually even have a clear example, then why am I listening to you? It's not productive. It's not productive for me to waste my time on it. It's not productive for Apple to listen to that, because it's not like they know, like for engineers, they know where to go and fix stuff if you don't tell them. Like here, at least we knew what to fix, right? But and then there's some stuff that's more opinion based, like this. But then if you just say, oh, Apple is crap now, well, then you can buy an alternative if you actually feel that way, right? But so now that we've gotten software out of the way, let's actually get to a little bit of hardware. This is coming from Majin Buu. Again, I know the track record of Majin Buu is a little bit up and down, not perfect. And this is a dummy model, so it's not like this is like a production model leaked early. There are some things that surprise me a little bit. Like this device doesn't actually look noticeably thicker than the 17, then the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. I guess the camera bump makes mostly sense. I guess it also depends a little bit on the exact angle at which it was photographed, so that kind of impacts like our perception of it. Plus, maybe the black makes it look slim, right? That's why I dress in black. But yeah, basically he is showing us a dummy of the iPhone 17 Pro. He shows us the full like bar along the edges. One thing I want to compliment is that it looks like the actual like curvature of the device is matching the curvature of the camera bar here, which as far as I understand, is currently not the case. Like it's rounded off a little bit differently right now. It looks from this angle almost as if it's not perfectly positioned, but I will just blame that on either an optical illusion or dummy model issues. I highly assume that once Apple ships it, it will actually all be properly aligned and stuff like that. So we keep the triangular camera layout. We know that the two biggest camera changes we're expecting this year is a 48 megapixel telephoto camera. But while it has been rumored that they might give you like a 10x optical zoom or something like that, like a super or ultra zoom, it seems like that's not happening. Most likely we are just getting 48 megapixel optical 5x zoom, and then on top of that you get another 2x, which is you zoom in on 12 megapixel inside that sensor, and you go from 48 megapixels to 12 megapixels, and you go from a 5x optical zoom to 2x digital zoom, which would be overall a 10x zoom versus the main camera. The other change is a 24 megapixel selfie camera, which is nice. Definitely, it's definitely appreciated. Hopefully, it actually comes with a good sensor and good optical system. It's not just a resolution increase. That's been a little bit my complaint with the ultra wide camera on the 16 Pro models, which it got an upgrade from 12 megapixels to 48, but the camera sensor was pretty much the same size, and the overall optical system on top of it wasn't really changed. So hopefully that Apple doesn't just increase resolution. For example, on the telephoto, which is a smaller than 1 by 3-inch sensor, I really would hope that this gets upgraded to at least a 1 by 2.55, which is the sensor that we have on the ultra wide camera. Riley, my brain has a severe curvature from these leaks. Well, I hope the way the brain works, it actually has a lot of curvatures, right? That it doesn't just like curve once, because that would be a very, very function limited brain. And judging from all the yapping that you do here, Riley, it kind of seems like, yeah, you're actually capable of some brain activity. Let's see if there's anything more. Obviously, Majin Buu is also the guy who leaked that we are expecting a vapor chamber inside the Pro models, but obviously here he does not like disassemble the device. I mean, it would make sense with a dummy anyway. Yeah, but I actually think this looks good. It does remain to be seen how Apple actually treats the camera bar. Right now, people assume it's going to be very similar to what is happening right now, which is you're going to get a matte back, but then a somewhat color matched glossy camera bar, right? Or camera island if you want to. How Apple further utilizes the fact that like we have more volumetric space now up there, whether that means we get a better front speaker, whether that means we get better antennas up there, or maybe the battery gets pushed a little bit higher and then the chip gets more cooling here and stuff like that. Again, there's a lot that we don't know. There's also, of course, the rumor that we're switching to aluminum, which I think Majin Buu kind of doubled down on with his leaks for the vapor chamber, but we don't know. And I'm not saying I'm waiting for Mark Gurman to confirm any of this, but it is we are now in this questionable period, unfortunately, where what we are seeing is becoming more and more definitive, but that leaves now more and more questions about stuff like what is the exact cooling situation, what is the exact battery capacity, right? Because that's very important. If they just promise you a larger battery, that's not as important, in my opinion, as how much larger it actually is. So if it's like 5% larger, that's probably not going to change too much. Like the higher power consumption of a vapor chamber enhanced processor and everything, a potentially brighter display, a display that better sustains the maximum brightness, right? All of that will play into the device. And let's be honest, the jump from N3E to N3P is not going to give us an insane efficiency jump on the processor. So let's just see ultimately how it plays out. I am mostly encouraged by everything that I have heard and seen of the product. My only wish is that it would feature an Apple-designed 5G modem. But granted, given that Apple does not yet believe their C1 to be good enough and C2 simply isn't ready, so that's for next year. So that leaves 2 nanometer for next year, a smaller dynamic island for next year, potentially technologies like silicon carbon batteries, which are rumored to come for the iPhone 17 Air, but not yet for the Pros. That could come to the Pros the year after. So there is a lot of change that is not being pushed back from the 17 generation to the 18. It's just that we learn about it coming for the 18. And while I am upgrading from my 15 Pro to the 17 Pro, I do have to say I am pretty excited about the upcoming 18 generation and 19 generation. In a way, I wasn't as excited, for example, when the iPhone 14 came out, about the 15 and 16. I was excited, obviously, enough to upgrade from my 13 to the 15, but like changes like the titanium body and everything, we kind of found out about all of that much closer to launch in a way. So I hope that whatever happens with the 17 Pro, if, for example, we find out it actually has an aluminum chassis, that it does play into making the device actually better, right? Giving us a bigger battery and faster charging without increasing weight, right? Giving us better cooling and a more advanced vapor chamber without increasing weight, right? Giving us roughly the same durability in a potentially lighter body, or again, a body with more battery, more cooling, better cameras. So I am very result oriented. I do tend to not overanalyze individual specs as much as I used to. If you remember, for example, leading up to the iPhone 16 series, we were all pretty much certain that the main camera would be upgraded from a 1x1.28 inch sensor to a 1x1.4, right? So it would be pretty much exactly in between the sensor that the iPhone already has and the full 1-inch sensors that you find in like Android device, in some Android Chinese flagships. But given that we've seen Apple still improve camera quality even without increasing sensor size, and the more I look into certain shortcomings of like super large sensor smartphones, and I see like, oh, the focal distance is really not convenient. It's already not great on the iPhone, but it would get even worse if it was an even larger sensor. It has a really aggressive bokeh by default, so that means you kind of don't really get edge-to-edge sharpness unless you're like photographing something panoramic. Yeah, so I am now more result oriented, but of course we're still gonna talk about the individual hardware. Riley, based on the leaks, the vapor chamber gonna be the biggest upgrade unless the battery is huge. Yeah, probably. Steve sharing a brain emoji about the curvature of Riley's brain. Yeah, I guess I think if it is 10% larger, so it would definitively be over 5,000 or even like 5,200 milliampere hours. Yes, that in my opinion would push the battery over the vapor chamber. But yeah, if we get like 40% better cooling and it results in close to no display dimming even on 5G and on a hot day, right? If it results in you playing games with like potentially, let's think about like, oh, okay, you have like 10-15% maybe more efficiency just from the Note, or let's say 10%. And then maybe you have some architectural advantages. Consider like 20, 30, even 40% better cooling. That could result in you having like 50% higher sustained frames per second. So yeah, in that case, I would put vapor chamber over battery, but for now, I kind of see them on a similar level. Because I also don't think that Apple will go completely nuts with the vapor chamber, knowing Apple. They will still leave some room for future improvements, right? And as they source it now for the first time, they will also push their suppliers more and more over time to reduce the cost like per volume. So over time they could give you a larger vapor chamber without actually paying substantially more for it. So Apple is the master for that. That's why they source displays from multiple suppliers. That's why they do that with storage and things like that. Yeah, it's only really on components where Apple has the upper hand, where they're the main creators behind it, it, where they have like a single supplier supply chain, like with the processors, obviously, right? Because Apple designs Apple Silicon, they work closely with TSMC, and that's why TSMC, at least for now, is the only semiconductor supplier for Apple. Speaking of actually supplies and getting the same component from multiple manufacturers, there is some good news about the M5 iPad Pro supposedly being ready for an October launch, which is honestly earlier than I expected. It does make sense given that the M4 iPad came out in May of last year, so that would be roughly an 18-month gap, maybe more 16 or 17 months overall. But I don't know why. I kind of expected the M5 iPad to be like an early 2026 launch, but maybe Apple has some other tricks up their sleeve. They're also transitioning more and more devices to their own in-house Wi-Fi modems later this year, so that might be another reason to upgrade the iPad. But yeah, basically Apple is sourcing Samsung display and LG display panels, and for both sizes. So for the current generation, Samsung handled basically the supply for the 11-inch iPad Pro, while LG supplied 13-inch panels. But on a broader basis, now Apple basically says, oh, now both of you can supply both panel sizes. Apparently, they also talked about BOE, like the Chinese display maker, to supply panels, but Apple still isn't happy with the quality they're delivering either for smartphone panels, which is funny because I do wonder what is going wrong at BOE that they aren't even seen as good enough for the iPhone 16e display. Like, it seems like that would be such a slam dunk supply for them. It's an 800 nit panel. It doesn't have the same color bit rate as the Pro devices or even the base 16 at this point. It's not ProMotion, and Apple doesn't need it overclocked in any way. It's not even 90 hertz or something like that. So I wonder really what's happening at BOE that Apple stays so unhappy with them, to be honest. Again, I cannot tell you, but it's now been years and years of repeatedly basically Apple going to BOE. It's been leaked that they're working with BOE, and then the afterthought basically comes out, oh yeah, Apple tried to do it with BOE, but basically couldn't. Okay, I don't have an article actually here. That's just the Mac Rumors website overall. So we have covered this complaint. This is the 9 to 5 Mag website. You guys see I had to prepare all of this a little bit quicker than I did last time. But we actually have a little bit more to talk about Android devices today than we often do. Now, I know this is an Apple-focused channel, but it's very important to acknowledge competition, especially if the competition is actually putting in effort. Now, we know that the Tensor G5 by the Pixel 10 will be based on TSMC 3 nanometer. To be more precise, it's rumored to be an N3E in the same year when Apple is rumored to bring out N3P for the A19 Pro chip. Now, for next year, Apple is rumored to be switching to 2 nanometer, and AMD is rumored to be switching to 2 nanometer, and Intel is rumored. So I am a little bit surprised that Google still found supposedly like some supply promises by TSMC. Seems like 2 nanometer might have actually pretty good yields, and that will bring up some comparisons down the road with Samsung, which right now is desperately trying to make their 3 nanometer GAAFET node work, which is kind of in line with TSMC's FinFET 3 nanometer, so it's way more expensive with way lower yields. But Samsung hopes to make a 2 nanometer design of that that's not even very much more advanced, but it primarily features better yields. However, at that point, they will have to compete, obviously, with TSMC's 2 nanometer node. Now, the reason why I mentioned Samsung is because the Tensor G4 and the Tensor G3 and the previous tensors were actually based on Samsung nodes. In fact, right now, they're based on Samsung 4 nanometer, which overall is more comparable to like TSMC 6 nanometer. So it's like 2 nodes behind what Apple is currently using, what Qualcomm is currently using, what MediaTek is currently using. And if Google actually goes through with that and adopts 2 nanometer next year with the Tensor G6 and the Pixel 11, at that point, I would be wondering if they only reserve it for the pros and give the base models maybe some rehashed Tensor G5, because that would be pretty expensive for the non-pro models. And before you get at me with, well, but Google doesn't care as much about profits as Apple, I do have some counterpoints to that coming in this video. Why did it become fully green once and now refuses to turn white? I guess we are in the beta times. So, according to a new report, Google is planning to jump to TSMC's 2 nanometer process for Tensor G6 faster than it has in prior years. The first Tensor chip in 2021's Pixel 6 was built on 5 nanometer process at Samsung, and then we obviously kind of got stuck with 4 nanometer. We got the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, but yeah, basically Tensor G3, G4, yikesy. Google's move to TSMC later this year with Tensor G5 will mark the transition to a 3 nanometer process. Now, I've seen some people say that this is going to be a larger leap, because to them it sounds larger to go from 3 nanometer to 2 nanometer, because I guess that's a reduction of 1/3. Then it sounds to go from 4 nanometer to 3 nanometer, which is happening this year. However, Samsung 4 nanometer to TSMC 3 nanometer is a way, way bigger gap than what TSMC is currently promising from their first version of 2 nanometers. So yeah, you're getting a way bigger leap this year than you will next year, at least as a percentage. However, it's going to be a way better leap, obviously, than the G3 or the G4, which have been repeatedly very disappointing. And supposedly, this is now marking Google fully going away from Samsung, but also being a more active competitor to Snapdragon, right? Now, whether that means that Google ever plans to sell their chips to maybe other Android phones or something like that, or maybe they greatly expand their lineup, or maybe they hope to really finally actually sell a big amount of products. Now, that all remains to be seen. Again, this could also be a wrong report. It could be maybe they're getting something wrong and it's actually for the Pixel 12 and the Tensor G7 or something like that. But now that obviously Google is on TSMC and most likely has a multi-year contract with them, I wouldn't be surprised if they definitely plan to adopt 2 nanometer in the not too distant future, which is definitely, even if it happens only in 2027 rather than 2026, that's still way better than having Samsung 4 nanometer in products all the way up to 2025. The S26 will get a newer chip. The S26 is getting the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2. There is pretty much no chance that I see Samsung going with like the Exynos 2600 on the flagship, right? Maybe on actually S26, right? But not the Ultra. In fact, I could bring it up right now, which is the Exynos 2600. I actually got a comment just today under my last video saying, oh, why are you comparing the Exynos 2500 versus the 8 Elite 2? We are so close to the Exynos 2600. And like my response to that is we don't know yet enough about the 2600. It's coming earliest in January, which obviously compares with like a September launch or at least an introduction for the 8 Elite 2. So yeah, it's at least like 2 months later than actual like production finished devices, like whatever going to be the Xiaomi 16 series or something like that. And obviously the Dimensity 9500 is going to power devices like the Vivo X300 series. And yeah, I'm just a little bit confused, but yeah, this is going to be Samsung's 2 nanometer chip. This is going to be comparable by all accounts. It's gonna be probably better than TSMC's N3P. Probably. That being said, we also kind of expected that for Samsung's 3 nanometer, which we expected it to be at least a competitor to N3B. But we still don't know because it got delayed a lot, right? It was supposed to come out for the Galaxy S25 series. Now it's coming for the Galaxy Z Flip 7. I'm not sure if it's coming to the Fold 7. Doesn't sound like that from the rumors. But yeah, whatever is happening with the Exynos 2600, uh, again, we can argue all we can want about like, oh, is it comparable to like Intel 18A or TSMC 2 nanometer or N2P down the road? None of that matters until Samsung actually is able to ship those products, ship actual products with that chip or sell that chip to somebody else. Yeah, Samsung really has a bad track record. Jan, hi to my most loyal German male viewer. Yeah, we are a little bit into the video, almost an hour, so I apologize if you guys are coming in and missing out on some of the earlier topics. I do promise to leave timestamps afterwards because this was a very early stream today. Usually I start at 6 p.m. my time. Today I started at 4 p.m. So, but you guys know the drill, right? Subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, super chatting, channel member making, Patreon subscribing, all of that. And yeah, Jan, I'm doing pretty well. Had a short work day today, so I was able to stream a little bit early, grabbed a bite with a buddy after work, and now I am mostly relaxed and have energy. That's why if you guys have any suggestions for what I should react to on YouTube or anything else like that, I tried looking into all the classic MKBHD, Linus, but I haven't found yet anything, at least nothing that comes even close to some of my recent reactions, like to front page tech and things like that. But yeah, I do try to keep up with all the rumors. You see, it's not just been me covering Apple, but I have gone out of my way to cover Android devices and processors. And that's because I do care about competition. If maybe I'm not like the prime customer for that competition, at least it will also encourage Apple to do better, or at least give us not too outrageous pricing. Plus, I have owned Samsung devices in the past. It's like secondary phones. So if down the line Samsung makes a very attractive smartphone that does something that maybe an iPhone does not do, then yeah, why wouldn't I consider that? Oh man, Jan, you're moving, so yeah, I fully understand the stress. I had a lot of work stress leading up to like basically like yesterday, so I am a little bit more relaxed today, but I do have a very long stressy day tomorrow, so I'm actually not streaming tomorrow. Expect me back probably on Friday, at worst on Saturday. Yeah, but that's basically to Samsung. Again, we can talk about numbers and, like, for example, about their supposed yields. Like, oh, are they at 40%? Are they at 50%? Again, none of that matters before the actual products make their way to consumers. If it is 50%, it is good enough for production, but it might not be good enough in terms of finances for Samsung, at which point it doesn't matter that it's a good node and it has acceptable somewhat yields, at least for like a first generation, if Samsung then doesn't decide to utilize it. And it doesn't matter if the Exynos 2600 is potentially a flagship processor if they don't give it to their most flagship product. Jan, you have like a box full of empty Apple boxes. So you're stacking boxes in a box like a Russian matryoshka. Well, have fun doing that. I hope your move moves well. Huh? No pun intended. No, all puns intended. Boy, how's you going, you all? It's all going quite well, man. So we have covered quite a few topics already today, but we are continuing with more Google coverage. So we just mentioned how the Pixel 11 is supposedly featuring a 2 nanometer based Tensor G6. However, we do have pretty bad news about at least the regular Pixel 10. So the Pixel 10 is obviously the less premium Pixel model this year. It's not quite the Pixel 10a that we're gonna get next year. Riley, I see you're now the undisputed number one. Steve, I guess is sleeping with the fishes or something like that. But congratulations, man. I saw you compete, but you're still the master of Yap. I don't know who said it. Was it Steve or Max who told you, who said that you're the owner of the Yap mines here? Basically, you have infinite Yap supplies. I highly, by the way, recommend you guys watch Andor, which it has like the scene where they're deciding to like strip mine a whole planet. Boy, you're about to go to the gym while you're joining our regular list of Steve and Max and everyone else who is like watching me for 5 minutes before eventually stopping commenting before they're at the gym. Yes, thank you still for joining, obviously. So let me just actually check something very much. Okay, so the Pixel 10, the non-Pro Pixel model this year, it's interesting, I would argue. It's definitely something that I am excited about because it is transitioning to 3 nanometer, which obviously is something that I do appreciate over Google's previous choices. However, it seems like the cost of adopting a somewhat cutting-edge node processor is really forcing Google to cut back. Riley saying the only person who cares about Pixel is Drew. Well, the problem is Drew doesn't even care about like the Pro models where you actually get like the benefits of like Google's camera algorithms and everything else like that, right? But he cares about like the Pixel A products because they're like a great deal. But then does he actually use those products long term? No. So and then again, the second he actually got gifted a 16 Pro Max by have to look at my own at Taurus. Taurus, please sponsor me too. I do actually use your products without sponsorship, and you won't even have to buy me an iPhone 17 Pro Max. Sorry. But yeah, Drew tries to bring up like the value argument about it and stuff like that. But I always feel like I should really stop saying stuff like that. I say that as filler. I'm fully aware of that. But like my language is way better than that. I shouldn't have to do that. But he says those things and then he doesn't really follow up on it. Like, I mean, even if we look on it, by the way, this is something I want to show you guys a little bit later on, but like we can actually see if Drew has posted anything new. Telosive text, so he posted his honest thoughts about liquid glass. Yeah, then like 1.5 weeks ago, he posted the rant on WWDC 25 interviews, which we reacted to. And then he bought like an Apple Watch Series 5 because it's like a ceramic model and he really liked that, which basically means he actually sold his Series 7 and then he's stuck without a watch. Okay, but that's a person. Hey Siri, stop. That's because I said serious. No, I said serious. Oh my god, now she's gonna think I said it again. But somewhere in here, he reacted to like the Pixel. He praised the Pixel 9a, but he was at the time looking for a phone, as far as I understand. Or was that right after he got the sponsorship with Taurus? Yeah, but I don't know. It feels like just very confused coverage. Boost Mobile has iPhone 15 for $99. Well, I assume with a contract, right? But yeah, I mean, if it's a really cheap contract, that could still be worth it. It really depends on your own personal preferences. I've seen some people say, oh, it's actually better that their products, they don't have Apple Intelligence, which to me is insane because like nobody's forcing you to use all Apple Intelligence features. Devices that actually have Apple Intelligence do like they do have other benefits too. Like they have newer chips with more memory, they have more efficient processors, they have better cooling, and they have other just premium stuff. So that's for you to decide if that's good enough of a deal for you. But going back to the actual Pixel rumors, I'm sorry, Riley, if you don't care about the pixels enough to actually like see me cover them. However, I do still prefer to cover them because it is main competition, right? I don't want to call them like it's good competition because in so many ways they are not, especially repeatedly. But if they're finally getting a little bit better, then I will probably have to talk about them more. I mean, Samsung has over the years become a worse and worse player actually in the game. So it's really hard to even say like, oh, should I keep shitting on Pixel as much as I usually do? Because what else do I then get to cover? Like Xiaomi, which steals like Apple's UI designs left and right. Vivo, which is barely better in that regard, right? Like their entire app layouts that are exactly the same there. Like what exactly would I then get to cover, at least with some love? Like I at least have some historical respect for Samsung for pushing like OLED technology and for a while being quite the only even innovator on mobile memory and mobile storage, right? In a way they still are, like with UFS storage and stuff like that. But yeah, getting back to the Pixel, because apparently my tongue wants to talk about everything, everything other than Pixel. So, Google has been on quite the journey over the past few years, refining its phones to seriously compete with industry juggernauts like Samsung and Apple. I highly question that, but okay. With the Pixel 9 series, the brand was able to accomplish this, introducing a set of phones that really impressed. So this is Android Police. This is not gonna be a website that does the best job about critiquing Google in that regard. Perhaps the most interesting part was that the base model was so good. I actually agree, not that it was so good, but it really made cutoffs that made sense, in my opinion. And apparently, this is not quite the case with Pixel 10, and I assume that's because using an actual somewhat close to flagship processor will put pricing pressure on other components. Steve, you're saying you care about Pixel a little. Okay. I hope little enough or still enough to watch this. But yeah, I understand. I do care about Pixel a little too. It is genuinely like somewhat even sometimes a morbid curiosity rather than actually like the interest of a tech enthusiast, like the way even I would cover a Xiaomi product. Like at least with a Xiaomi product, I can be like, oh, okay, they're some of the first to utilize a new Elite chip, and they do experiment with new vapor chambers, even if they don't really benefit too much from that. And now they even build their own processors, right? Which I've I've reacted to the Geek Event video about it. Samsung was better until Apple stopped fighting with physics. Yeah, once we really went beyond, like I would argue with the iPhone 10, right? We didn't get like the biggest battery or the biggest camera sensors right away, but I feel like the iPhone 10 basically being the base model of like a 5.8-inch device rather than a 4.7-inch device, and being thicker and relying even on heftier materials. Like, again, not that an aluminum-based iPhone 10 would be way less premium, but Apple really said, look, we don't care as much about anymore about being the thinnest or the lightest. Here's actually a pretty hefty phone for being like somewhat compact. And then they introduced the Plus models, no, the Max models, and then yeah, the rest is history. And soon we're gonna get foldables. They're gonna be larger. Yeah, plenty of changes. So, but let's actually talk about the changes of the Pixel 10, because I think this has been now the fourth time that I completely got away from my Pixel coverage. Riley, you cursed me by saying nobody cares about Pixel, and Steve saying you care about it a little. The news comes from Android headlines. I guess I can open that then, right? Pixel 10 still lacks a vapor chamber despite telephoto upgrades. Okay. Google did what? So no Wi-Fi 7 or ultra res zoom either. I don't actually know that website. Is that like a summary website that sometimes posts to stuff of their own? That includes Wi-Fi 7 because the Pixel 10 is not getting Wi-Fi 7. Supposedly, even though the actual Pixel 9 had Wi-Fi 7, so that would actually be a downgrade going from Wi-Fi 7 to what I assume is going to be Wi-Fi 6E. It's also not getting the new ultra res zoom feature and ultra stable video recording. They're saying it's like putting a gimbal on the Pixel 10 Pro. So whatever is going to be happening with the Pixel 10 Pro, not all the benefits are coming to the Pixel 10. But at least that one is not a downgrade. It's just not getting the same feature as before. A few design aspects that are only going to be on the Pixel 10. That's going to be on the matte sides and the glossy back. That's a design combination I'm not a big fan of in 2025. That jab at Samsung chips, though, in the article? Or did I say something? I do jab at everyone. Oh yeah, here, yeah. Basically, they're saying that a vapor chamber might not be necessary because they're switching to a much more efficient processor. Which, if they actually clock the and maybe even bin down the upcoming Tensor G5 from the Pro models to the regular models, then yeah, you will actually find that. It's very likely that even if this is an underclocked chip and everything else like that, it will still greatly outperform the Tensor G4, or it will match it with still way, way, way better efficiency. That being said, I think that the 10 Pro definitely will need a vapor chamber, because while the N3E Note is good, we see what happens with N3E chips on Android that are not vapor chamber enhanced, right? It's really not good. In fact, I don't think anybody does that even. I'm not sure about like the Poco or the Pico, the Poco phones. I'm not sure if their flagships have vapor chambers. I would assume they do, but they really don't have the greatest cooling. And the other thing about the Pixel, where have I hidden everything here? So there are some good stuff on the horizon for the Pixel 10 series, supposedly like an improved pulse width modulation refresh rate. So if you don't know, if the pulse width modulation, which is how OLED screens get darker, right? They basically pulse at a different frequency. They do not like just like reduce brightness the way that a traditional LCD would. And basically, if that refresh rate of that modulation is too low, you can actually even subconsciously perceive it. That gives some people headaches, and yeah, it's not a good experience. To me, I either don't perceive it, or every iPhone that has ever had OLED, in my opinion, has had enough of a PWM refresh rate. Like, I know that there are now some Android phones that give you like 2 or even 4,000 refresh rate PWM, which in my opinion is probably overkill. But Samsung, for example, is lacking behind in that way. And I've also seen some people complain about pixels in the past. So maybe this will finally fix it. And there's also going to be supposedly improved brightness. My assumption here is, so the PWM jumps from 240 to 480 hertz. I believe that would put it close to the iPhone, or even about the same level. The same report claims that the base Pixel 10 will hit a higher declared HDR brightness of 2000 nits, up from 1800 nits, and Pixel 10 Pro XL would hit 2250 nits, up from 2050 nits. If you actually look at how bright those phones get in like GSM Arena testing, they do reach like 2000 nits and even higher. It's really often just a question about sustained display brightness. But yeah, also HDR brightness is more of a tuning issue, because obviously if you have like outdoor brightness that gives you to 2500 nits, right? You definitely can do HDR brightness, which is on only small portions of the screen, at up to 2000 nits, but you need to tune the device for that, right? The color accuracy needs to be right, the contrast needs to be right, the way like OLEDs have like pixel level contrast, right? Basically, unlike like a mini LED screen, which for example my MacBook Pro has like 2500 zones or something like that. But OLEDs still need a good processor to manage all those chips, changing not just colors but also brightness level. So that seems like a roughly 10% improvement in handling that kind of HDR. Obviously, in terms of peak brightness, they have already advertised 3000 nits. So these kinds of changes to me suggest better sustained peak brightness and better handling of HDR. Apple gives you roughly 1600 nits of brightness for HDR and 2000 nits of peak brightness. So in fact, even like panels that obviously could go way higher than like 1000 nits, for example, their mini LED panels, they still maintain roughly a 1600 nit HDR brightness. So this is something that's clearly not an actual technological limitation on Apple's side. It's clearly something they're just like, they like the way it looks. They probably think it has a good balance of like brightness and color and power consumption and heat generation. I wouldn't be surprised if down the road we get like over 2000 nit HDR handling by Apple, but for now it seems like 1600 nits is where they roughly found their peak. You also see that even on like mini LED laptop panels that promise you even higher brightness levels or similar brightness levels to the MacBook, they just don't handle HDR too well, right? And I am talking about like mini LED panels that could do like zone-based brightness controls really well, but they don't, because they don't optimize the chip, the software, and the screen themselves. They have an Intel or AMD chip, they have the Windows software as a middleman, and then they have a screen from whomever they source it, be it Japan Display or whatever. So yeah, Apple definitely, in terms of like laptops and stuff like that, has been the best HDR company in that regard. M1 Max, with the new A19 Pro chip and vapor chamber cooling, could the iPhone actually run GTA 5? 5? Easily. What are you talking about? GTA 5 could run easily on like an A16 chip. Like it got an upgraded version on Steam and the current gen consoles. But if you are talking about the initial release, don't forget GTA 5 ran on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, and the new smartphones are way more powerful than that. Like, don't forget, the PS3 had 512 megabytes of memory, and that was actually split in two, with 256 megabytes usable by the GPU, I'm putting that in quotes because the architecture of the PS3 sometimes makes it difficult to differentiate between the CPU and the GPU. However, M1 Max, if you potentially were talking about GTA 6, could it run? Yes, probably in a very downscaled way. GTA 6 is being designed for the Xbox Series S, right? Right, it's designed for PS5 primarily, because let's not kid ourselves, that's the currently best-selling like actual home console. The Xbox Series X has pretty similar capabilities to the regular PS5, so it's gonna be pretty easy to port between those two. But then the Series S, instead of 16 gigabytes of RAM, out of which roughly 12 gigabytes are available for usage, it only has 10 gigabytes of memory, with it a smaller bus, so less bandwidth, and only 8 gigabytes of those are actually usable for games. Like 2 gigabytes are reserved for the system and things like that. So GTA 6, if we take what's going to be most likely a 30 FPS, very low resolution model that's designed for a version that's going to be designed for the Series S, and we further downgrade it, maybe we take advantage of Apple's superior ray tracing per raster. We take advantage of Apple's hardware accelerated upscaling, so you can actually use like 480p as a base resolution and upscale it to 720 on the iPhone screen. I think that GTA 6 would be runnable, but I don't think it would be a great experience overall. For that, I think we are looking probably more like 2 nanometer chips and beyond. Yeah, but like for example on iPads, I could see an M3 running GTA 6, right? At least like maybe the 16 gigabyte of RAM versions, right? It would lose obviously some performance due to thermal throttling and things of that nature, but yeah, I could see that at least working. Hopefully I answered that enough. I even answered an alternative version of your question. So we talked about the Pixel 10 downgrades and upgrades. I should note there's also been a rumor floating around that the Pixel 10 would actually have a noticeably worse main camera, going from a 1 by 1.3 inch sensor to a 1 by 1.95, so roughly a 1 by 2 inch sensor. And that would be a pretty huge downgrade, because even the base iPhone 16 features a 1 by 1.56 inch sensor. We know that basically the entire Pixel 10 lineup is going to be relying on Samsung sensors. So that's actually funny, is while they're moving away from Samsung with semiconductors and their processors, they are even more embracing Samsung camera sensors, probably because they're similarly cheap to how Samsung Notes is versus TSMC, but the ratio is just way better, right? Samsung sensors are not as much worse versus Sony as their Note is worse versus TSMC. I could actually try looking into that if the Pixel 10 smaller sensor. Change to English. Oh yeah, even. Oh yeah. Wait, where's the source for that? Here are the camera specs. The rest of the camera are pixel closer to the Pixel 9a than any other Pixel 10 device. I assume they mean Pixel 9. The primary sensor has been replaced by a Samsung GN8, a considerably smaller model than the previously used GNV, which is probably like the V is like a Roman numeral 5. Similarly, the ultra-wide lens has been downgraded to a Sony IMX 712 from a previous IMX 858. Both of these sensors have previously appeared in the Pixel 9a. Really? Okay, so we actually even have a list. Let's see if that's correct. That's going to be bad. Okay, so the Pixel 9 as a main sensor featured a 1 by 3 inch sensor, which is going to be roughly the same as on the Pixel 10 Pro and Pro XL. now being downgraded for the regular Pixel 10. We've had a Samsung IMX 858, which is, I think that's the one that Apple uses for their ultra wide as well. Now being downgraded. Wait, that's Apple's. That's the sensor, roughly the one that Apple uses for their telephoto camera. The one that's being upgraded probably this year to that. Meanwhile, the Pixel 10 is being downgraded from this to that. Okay, so I assume that they just like ordered these sensors from Sony and said like, you know what, we're just gonna maximize our logistics here as much as we can. But oh yeah, the Pixel 10 is getting a telephoto, which is a pretty decently sized one. What the fuck is an 11 megapixel camera though? Really? Samsung 3J1. I actually haven't heard about that rumor. But wait, it's gonna have a better telephoto than the Pros? That makes no sense. Does it make sense to you guys? Yeah, that's just insane. Let me quickly Pixel. I guess that's the kind of the main story of this sensor. It's a 10.87 megapixel image sensor. Steve, you're saying no sense. Yeah, I agree. So it's a 10.87 megapixel image sensor with an ultra fast autofocusing dual pixel technology. Okay. Balance the light, brighter and more vivid. Interested in learning more. Oh my. What? You just don't have a tech specs website? Okay. How? We're going to be talking to Samsung's AI right now. How big is the 3J1? This is so fucking stupid. No way, Samsung. It's a 1x3 inch sensor. Jesus Christ. Yeah, okay, so that's good that I asked Samsung's AI here. That's so stupid. Yeah, okay, so they basically got this wrong. Maybe they couldn't even think that it would be such a bad sensor. And don't get me wrong, I do dislike that Apple uses sensors that are this small, right? Like Apple uses roughly a 1x3, 1.31 inch sensor for their telephoto, but they do compensate that with, which by now I consider Apple's algorithms and Apple image signal processors superior to Google. I also consider Apple's optical image stabilization, especially for the telephoto, superior. Now, don't get me wrong, it's good that we are now having a tri-camera setup on the base model, but oh Jesus, that's such a waste. Just give it the same thing here. But I also wonder what's actually going to be the zoom range, because I highly doubt that they're going to give it a 5x zoom, right? It's going to be like 3x or something like that. Pixel 9 Pro Fold. Yeah, the Fold does. For the Fold, I'm actually fine with the kind of compromises. So the 10 Pro Fold, also got its specs leaked. Okay, so it might be smaller, but might also just be zooming in a little bit. Interesting. We do have the same garbage ultra wide, and we do have the same pretty much garbage telephoto. Thank you for absolutely nothing. We have a horrible selfie camera by. Why do people claim that the Pixel 9 Pro has anything close to like flagship level camera specs? That's just like they would have to reduce pricing with that, right? Like I wasn't happy with like the iPhone 16e jumping to a 1 by 2.5 inch sensor. But the reason why it could kind of get away with that, because it's not a successor to anything that already exists, right? It's its own model. It sits somewhere between where the previous SE was and where the obviously the current regular 16 model is. But like really, Google is downgrading so hard, and even like across the board, like the two cameras you're actually most likely to use here. And don't get me wrong, I do love me the telephoto camera inclusion, but Jesus, like this sensor, except for like the ultra zoom stuff, that would like DAI stuff, in my opinion, already underperforms the iPhone camera in even medium lighting condition. It gets absolutely destroyed in low light by the iPhone because it has so much worse image stabilization. And I do think that the iPhone's telephoto is not even that great, right? I think that it has a chance to finally be somewhat very good this year with the switch to 48 megapixels, but this is just gonna be like a consolation price, in my opinion. This is not gonna be convincing to anyone. Yeah, and by the way, they are getting stuff wrong here, right? They're calling this the 3J1 with the same 1.13 inches, which is obviously not possible for a selfie camera. Just with the way that optics work, yeah, that would be an impossible like optical arrangement. So it's a 1 by 3 inch sensor. Thank you, Samsung AI. At least something useful came out of it, right? Do we have anything more? We have the Samsung, we have the One movie. I think we've covered close to everything, right? I mean, I could like talk just unreasonably more about like the Samsung the iOS 26 beta, or I could bring up every single chip we've ever talked about, like the Xiaomi X Ring, but I do not think that we honestly have enough details. Like, if you want more chip talk from me, you're free to check out my previous video as well. The one thing that I did want to show you guys is actually a little bit about the Switch. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think some specs are often undervalued and some specs are misunderstood. For example, when Apple switched to mini LED on iPad Pros and on MacBook Pros, right, it came with a huge penalty to pixel response times, right? The way Apple handled those screens, they were like really slow, not really suitable for like shooter gaming and stuff like that. And even when I use my MacBook Pro, which is the first generation of those panels, it can feel way slower than a 120 hertz panel should. In comparison, like 120 hertz on my iPhone feels way smoother. However, why did Apple give us a mini LED screen? Well, for one, it's way brighter, has way better contrast handling in certain scenarios where you have a lot of black on the screen. It's also more efficient, and overall, like especially now that we are pushing the screen to like 1,000 nits, and we've moved to technologies like quantum dots, Apple has made it faster again, right? And obviously, we know that Apple still prefers OLEDs, or at least like screens with pixel level control. So down the road, I hope they adopt micro LED. But like the tandem OLED screen on the iPad Pro is considered to be Apple's best screen. I believe that's what Apple calls it on their own website. So they clearly prefer OLED versus LCD in general, especially if it's done well. However, sometimes you need to go with LCD because it's cheaper, right? And sometimes your panel will not be quite as fast as it should be. My issue with that is not that sometimes devices fall short, because obviously I know that my Mac made that compromise to give me a way better HDR experience, a brighter screen, and everything else like that. But looking at the Switch 2, we are getting something really, really embarrassing, because coming out 8 years after the original Switch and coming out at a higher price than the original Switch, in fact, at a higher price than the Switch OLED, people started to notice that the screen was very ghosty, very blurry, very slow, if you know those terms, right? The pixel response time was basically garbage. And yeah, this is now tested by Monitor Unboxed, which is basically like a sister site to Hardware Unboxed. It's run by one of the guys behind Hardware Unboxed. And they tested it and they found out that it has a 33.3, which actually would coincide with a 30 FPS refresh rate or 30 hertz refresh rate on the panel, while a lot of even very standard LCD panels that are also based on IPS technology will give you like roughly 5 times faster responses. OLED will give you like sub 1 millisecond, especially if you're also using an OLED that is very highly, that has a high refresh rate behind it. Now, this could go up in 120 FPS scenarios, because right now there's only, and I think that maybe the guy testing this didn't know that, but there is one app on the Switch 2 that gives you 120 hertz, and that is the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, which is basically a tech demo with smaller mini games that show off the hardware, and one of the games shows off how much smoother 120 hertz is versus 60 or versus 30. But with those kinds of response times at 60 hertz, you bet your ass it's not being much faster than like 25 milliseconds at 120. And at 120 hertz, you would need roughly like 8 millisecond response times for it to be perfect. And you probably could get away with like 16 milliseconds or so, which is more the response time you need for a perfect 60 hertz refresh rate. But it's still workable in a 120 FPS container or in a 120 hertz container. This is not workable. Like, it's barely workable for a standard 60 hertz panel. It definitely does not allow for like proper scaling to 120, because if it was better as a panel, then it wouldn't be as bad as at 60. Yeah. And you can actually see how that compares. You can see that with the UFO test and from Blurbusters, where basically even versus the original Switch LCD, which had a very slow LCD around like 22 milliseconds, that is still like less smooth than this. And then obviously once you move up to an OLED, and again, all of this was tested at 60 hertz, these panels can run at 120 to 40, and the Switch can run at 120. But if it cannot even get this right even remotely, then I don't think it will even be that much better at 120.
Are complaining.
Yeah, so it's really... yeah, he explains how like the blur trails are huge, how basically entire shapes are like fully lost, how the alien is barely recognizable in any way. And yeah, maybe if at 120, maybe at 120, it would have looked more similar to the Switch original LCD at 60, which is still embarrassing for a product that costs almost 50% more and comes out 8 years later, right? And then it was tested for HDR handling. For one, it has a very cold screen. So at roughly 7900K, it's not really well tuned, but it is something that Nintendo likes. It has good performance in DCI-P3, but then when it comes to actual panel brightness, does it not show? So the contrast is okay for an IPS. It's not groundbreaking. But yeah, when it comes to the brightness, we get a screen that maxes out at 430 nits. I just remember that. Jesus, why does it not have the timestamps of the actual video?
Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. I've recently seen some discussion online about how the Nintendo... Moving on now to some other tests I performed. The Switch 2 screen is brighter than the previous model, increasing from around 3.
Yeah, so again, brighter, but nowhere near enough for HDR brightness. Like anything below 600 nits, especially without like pixel level control like OLED or zone control like on mini LED, like nothing below 600 nits is even remotely HDR. And to be quite honest, without zone control, whether it's an actual zone or it's per pixel, nothing actually is HDR. It's just extremely bright, but you cannot really regulate that brightness per like per zone or per object on the screen, certainly not per pixel on this screen. So basically, if you want a Nintendo Switch 2 with a good built-in screen, you would have to wait for like a inevitable Nintendo Switch 2 OLED version, similar to what we got with the original release. Yeah, but that's about it for today. I think I've covered everything in the world of tech that kind of sprang out to me a lot recently. I also recommend you guys check out Andrew Tsai. Now, I do know that he shills a little bit for the stuff that he covers because he's sponsored by all of them, but
Apple Silicon.
So basically, there's an update to Parallels. It's not even a huge performance upgrade or anything, but it does bring some new features. And if you care about that, any of those features, so you can check out the video. He also offers like a Parallels discount, which I use Parallels for certain Windows-related stuff. So again, you don't have to love the way that it's obviously more of an ad than an actual video, but Parallels is still a good tool, as is Crossover. So if you're really intent on using Windows applications on your Mac, be it inside a virtual machine like in Parallels, or right inside Mac OS like with Crossover, check out his channel. Also check out Mr. Mac Wright for continued coverage of just the gaming situation on Mac. I also Digital Foundry clips. I also recommend Digital Foundry's channel for their recent talk about some Apple stuff. You can go right away to their clips channel, so you don't have to go to the entire podcast. Basically, it's an 8-minute video, and they talk about how Apple actually is pretty ambitious in the kind of technologies they adopt for gaming. So the fact that, for example, like ray reconstruction or denoising is coming into play, right? That's a feature that right now is only available on NVIDIA hardware. Even Sony, when introducing the PS5 Pro, actually talked about some of those features, but they're not, for example, yet on the PS5 Pro. And out of the features that Apple introduced, the one that was already on AMD hardware was frame interpolation. But it's always questionable because AMD does not really have that great AI hardware. So while they have improved greatly with FSR 4 versus FSR 3, I do wonder how much AI overhead they really have to also include stuff like ray reconstruction and frame interpolation on top of that, right? Their frame interpolation, at least in FSR 3, was not running on like any AI hardware because RDNA 3, 3.5, RDNA 2, none of that hardware had like a neural engine, so to speak, or something like NVIDIA's Tensor cores. Yeah, it's all very interesting the way it's playing out. I think in terms of like raw like hardware behind it and pretty ambitious software rollouts, Apple is actually delivering quite a lot with gaming, but they do now need the adoption of developers, and then eventually they also need users to actually buy games, subscribe to game subscriptions or something like that, or at least buy microtransactions so that more AAA games, more demanding games can be ported. Until then, we'll have to rely more on tools like Parallels and Crossover. So that's why I thought I would kind of mention all of them together. I do love, and I did want to cover that because in some of my recent videos, I've obviously been shitting on like front page tech and in some ways on Drew from Tylosive Tech, and obviously on Linus Tech Tips. even though I was also praising the other guy who was not Linus in the video, who actually ended up buying himself a MacBook Pro. In fact, in this video, I think that the Digital Foundry guys, the console and PC guys, I believe Oliver McKenzie is his name. He says that he himself owns an M1 Max MacBook Pro, so that's like my MacBook, and an M1 Ultra Max Studio for video editing because of his job, and that he would like to more often upgrade his Apple technology, especially if gaming becomes a bigger thing on there, but it's just too costly. It's not the same as upgrading a console. It's definitely not the same as sliding in a new GPU in an already built PC tower. And I'm not sure who says it. It might be the leader here. But he says somewhere in the video that, like, if you want a laptop and you do anything but gaming, basically, buy a MacBook. And he even said that, like, the Mac Mini has, like, great value, right? He called it cheap, which I disagree with. I think it's good value. I don't think it's outright cheap. But yeah, it's funny how I think that while a lot of communities are not really souring on Apple, but I think they're covering Apple in this more vitriolic and negative way for the clicks. I think that people who actually use Apple technology are, like, quite honestly more and more happy with it, because like the baseline even with iPhones was good already, I would argue, like even 5 years ago, like, or even argue like 3 years ago, right? People praise, for example, the performance and the brightness and especially the battery life of the iPhone 13 Pro series, right? And look how much further we've come from there, and supposedly we get another huge battery boost this year. We might finally get a new generation similar to the 11 series and similar to the 13 series, where everyone says, man, that battery is not just good, it's king, right? It's best in class. Like the 16 Pro Max, yes, has great battery life, and anybody who think it is worse than on the 13 Pro Max is a moron. But it came out right at the time when a lot of Chinese devices went from like 5200, 5500 to 5800, 6100 milliampere hours, right? And some gaming phones went from like 6000 to like 7000, 7500 milliampere hours. So while the iPhone still performs well and even outperforms many of those other products, it's definitely not as far ahead as it used to be. It is better though than Samsung in basically every imaginable way. I know some people like to jerk off to like, oh, Samsung still has the higher battery capacity. What does that matter if the display is like a full generation behind in terms of efficiency, if the chip is good but definitely less efficient than the A18? So yeah, check out those guys for they don't cover Apple stuff too often, unfortunately, but yeah, they were also some of the first who brought up that display issue for the Switch 2. So I kind of that brought it all together, right? So Monitors Unboxed gave us more details on that. Then they talked more about Apple, and with that, I also connected it to channels like Mr. Mac Right and Android Sci. Of course, feel free to share out to others in the community, preferably on Discord, because YouTube is really shit when it comes to link sharing, though I think YouTube links are okay. Yeah, share also other YouTubers, because I do not want to give this impression that I'm like shitting on every YouTuber out there, like I am the best one ever. That's just not the case. I just feel like Front Page Tech has completely lost the plot, and I think Drew from Telosive Tech is just very, very confused, and I think Linus is just very nitpicky when it comes to Apple in a way he simply isn't about other technology. Yeah, but that should be about it for today. Because when I left last time, the new beta came out right away. Samsung is preparing to launch its first extended reality XR headset later in year 2025. It will reportedly contain displays that surpass the resolution of Apple's Vision Pro. It will use 1.3-inch OLEDs on silicon, so that's similar to Apple, with a pixel density of 3800, while Vision Pro has larger displays but slightly lower pixel density. I would be surprised if that's the case, because not because I don't think Samsung is capable of doing that, but I wonder what the actual price of Project Muhan is going to be. It seemed to me across the board like Project Muhan was like a $500-600 product. Now I wonder how expensive it actually might be. But hey, if that's the case, that's all the better for me, right? Because down the line, that could mean that Samsung could start supplying Apple Vision Pro 2 or Pro 3 or Apple Vision Air displays, right? And in that regard, we could see them competing with Sony and substantially bring down cost. Sony actually was like known for like refusing to even produce that much. They either didn't believe in the capacity of Apple to sell it, or they thought that they wouldn't find any other purchaser than Apple. Now they definitely won't be getting all of Apple's deals either, I would argue, because unless Samsung's quality is substantially behind or different in some way, this would be great for Apple. And in fact, I honestly think that for Samsung, while they won't admit it, while they will pretend like Project Muhan is some big deal for them, I honestly think they are way more interested in selling you the tech behind Project Muhan than they are in selling you the actual Project Muhan. So they would probably try to sell you more sensors, cameras, lidars, and everything. They probably want to sell you the screens that go in there, right? So let's see how it ultimately plays out. If it's actually a great screen, that would definitely be great. I mean, don't forget that Vision Pro is, of course, now quite a bit old at this point. I mean, it is powered by M2 after all, and it's going to be replaced by a generation powered by M5. But yeah, I'm fascinated by it. As I've said about the Pixel devices, I think that competition is great, just because I don't personally love how a lot of the competition copies a bit too much, or when they don't copy, they go like in almost the opposite direction, which is I don't want to be like too negative, but it's kind of like copying, because you put a similarly low amount of effort into it because you were like, oh, how can we be anti-Apple, right? I think that some companies over the years have done a good job to try differentiate themselves. I think HTC was one of those companies. I think their overall unibody design was good. I think their Android skin was high quality. Guys, because we are slowly tuning out. Oh, we had 0.0% frame drop, so it seems like my internet was pretty stable. But I think HTC was historically a good attempt. LG, not really. I never liked their skin, and when they tried like those modules and everything, that just more felt like, oh, we're doing the opposite of Apple rather than we're actually doing something that consumers will like. I think Motorola had a good phase before they like failed and had to be sold. I think. What else? Like, I think that Samsung, when they switched to One UI, I think that was a good attempt, especially when they tried to go really with focusing on one-handed usage. I think that's something that stuck out to me as something that Apple wasn't quite offering in the same way. And I think that Pixel, when they initially came out and they focused so much on cameras, and they definitely try to trim the fat of Android a little bit. Yeah, but that's probably about my favorites. But yeah. It's not like I want to shit on everybody. I don't want to shit on other YouTubers all the time. I don't want to shit on other companies all the time. But I do shit on Apple too, but Apple just gives me way less opportunity. I could be shitting on every small failure in a beta release, but Yeah, Steve, you're saying OnePlus used to be good. Oh, I actually agree. I think especially for the price, like back in the day, like getting like his flagship Snapdragon chip and a good amount of memory and fast and a decent amount of storage. While yes, their cameras weren't the greatest and maybe the screens weren't the brightest. It was still relatively flagship chips. Like you wouldn't get the best speakers, haptics, microphones, right? Those are usually the things I mention when it comes to quality of life. But now, while I still think OnePlus does decent devices, now they kind of merge their Western skin with the Android skin that they use for Chinese devices. That really has not worked too well in my eyes. Yeah, again, I probably will talk about more of this in general. Maybe by the time the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2 is close to coming out, or devices with it are actually coming out, I think that would be a good opportunity for me to go through those devices, not just by like a hardware perspective, but actually react to more reviews about them, more impressions, because over the time I have gotten a pretty decent impression of like Vivo and Xiaomi and like those higher end Chinese competitors. But maybe I should also look back into a little bit more OnePlus. Like I liked, for example, that foldable that they did, the OnePlus Open, even though they haven't yet given it a full sequel. Yeah, so yes, thank you, Steve, for mentioning OnePlus. And I probably should look into them a little bit more. The problem is just like they still give you, like, from a hardware perspective, better value, but they're just so much closer in price now at like roughly $1,000. Here in Europe, it's actually better for OnePlus because the price difference to iPhones is significantly larger, because OnePlus costs roughly $1,000 for the premium models here as well, but then it goes on discount, and like any model that isn't like the full like 500 gigabytes or 1 terabyte or 16 gigs of RAM, that one is like $700-800 versus iPhones that at that point are 1,400 euros or something like that. So yeah, I should probably like just look more into competition in general, so we don't have to have the same disappointing talks as, for example, we talked about certain downgrades for the Pixel 10 today, and we talked about Samsung supposedly not giving a new camera system to either the S26 or the 27 Ultra. So hopefully we have more positive stuff to talk about. While I am not Drew, I am absolutely fine with this channel being primarily majority Apple. But I am also not fine not knowing about the competition, nor will I be praising competition like the Pixel 9a just because it's not crap. I mean, even the Pixel 9a, I believe, had some downgrades over the Pixel 8a. It just had a good price and a pretty good battery life for what it was. Yeah, but I think that's about it. I think I've rambled quite enough. It's been an almost 2-hour stream. Thank you to anyone who joined. We had a pretty lively live chat, few super chats actually. So I'm very, very glad for all of that. Told you guys that tomorrow I'm most likely not streaming unless work gets canceled, but I guess not. But also beyond that, I would just like happy to cover all the stuff related to WWDC still, to all the new betas. And of course, we are now slowly approaching new generations of hardware. I mean, obviously September is iPhone, probably also Apple Watch time. Judging from what we also reacted to today, it seems like October might be time for an M5 iPad Pro. So that is obviously playing into all that. My October is going to be very busy, so I will try to make time for streams, but honestly, it might be very, very irregular. So I'll hope that we get enough leaks and rumors before that for me to still be somewhat up to date. Yeah, but that's about it. I've rambled now even more, so that's even more enough. Thank you to all of you. Let me know what else you would like to see me cover next, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.